Welcome to the Healing Pain Podcast with Dr. Joe Tatta. Each week, we interview top experts in physical therapy, pain science, and integrative pain care. You'll learn the most up-to-date information for treating and reversing persistent pain. This podcast is for educational purposes only and not intended to be used as personalized medical advice. And now, here's your host, Dr. Joe Tatta.
Hey there, welcome to episode number 242 of the Healing Pain Podcast. Thanks for joining us and taking the time to download this week's episode and tune in. My guest this week is Mathew Embry. Mathew has a great story of overcoming adversity and a chronic condition. Mathew was diagnosed with a debilitating form of progressive MS, where he was offered no cure and few, if any, solutions. So he and his father, who is a PhD-trained researcher, set out on a quest to find answers. They dove into the peer-reviewed medical literature, and they discovered natural ways to halt and reverse the progression of multiple sclerosis. His entire journey can be found in the Amazon documentary called Living Proof, where Mathew shares his story of halting the progression of MS. The documentary also explores the relationship between MS charities and the pharmaceutical industry, their lack of transparency with regard to medical funding, as well as their power, influence, and sometimes their ability to avoid opportunities to raise awareness around lifestyle-based treatments such as nutrition and exercise therapy for the treatment of MS. We discuss his story and how potential conflicts of interest affect those in need of chronic disease treatment. Okay, without further ado, let's begin and let's meet Mathew Embry. Hey there, Mathew. Welcome to this week's episode of the Healing Pain Podcast. It's great to have you here.
Hi, Joe. Thank you for doing this. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, sometime a couple months ago, I was checking out Amazon Prime and flipping through movies and things to look at. And I came across your documentary, Living Proof, and it really struck me and your story struck me. And I was looking forward to having you on the podcast and just talk to you. And I know that this message is going to resonate with a lot of the followers of the podcast. If we can start, for you, it's been a number of decades now, but can you take us back to when you were first diagnosed with multiple sclerosis and how old were you and what did that look like for you?
Sure. I mean, again, thank you for having me on this podcast. It's great to have this kind of exposure. We're going back over 26 years ago now when I had my first exacerbation, and I was 19 years old. And most 19-year-olds, not most to say, I was, pretty physically fit and active as best I could be. Came home from mountain biking, was kicking a basketball actually, and suddenly was having trouble feeling the ball in the way that I was used to. Within about 20 minutes-ish, that feeling of numbness, and it's hard to explain because it's almost like a hypersensitivity on one level too. It just spread right up into my chest. And that's when it started. And then after that, leg spasms followed. Then, of course, you think you pinched a nerve, especially because I'd just been biking, something like that. And then, you're off to the neurologist after seeing your general practitioner, and then had the MRI. And then, that was when this part of my journey began.
And 25 years ago, things were different. There's more information now about MS than there obviously was 25 years ago. I'm just wondering, what were the treatments that were offered to you back then? And how long were you, I guess, engaged with that, I would say, traditional allopathic model of treatment?
Yeah, I went right on. I did the first dose of steroids right away, the prednisone. That was the first thing. And, to the prednisone's credit, it did subside some of the symptoms, like the leg spasms in particular. I remember it went away, which is really good because that was very bothering to me. But back then, the MS drugs were just getting into the market in a big way, right? They were very experimental. I believe I was given an option to go as part of a trial, like a test trial. I think it was with beta interferon. Forgive me if that was not the drug, but I remember that was the case. But there wasn't much. They used to refer to MS, I've been told, as, diagnosis audiosis. Mm-hmm. So once you had it, it was, goodbye. And, they give you some pretty grim outlooks, right? And they divide it up into three categories, for me at least. And this is where it's going to go. And I just, that didn't work for me and didn't work for my family. So that's when we decided to get active.
And then, so you mentioned your family. I mean, I know your dad's a big part of your story, and he's a big part of the movie Living Proof, which everyone can check out. It's on Amazon Prime. I recommend everyone check it out and watch it, especially if you're someone living with MS or even if you're someone living with chronic pain. It's a really great documentary. But was your dad the one to kind of start to, I mean, your dad has a PhD, so he understands research, and he started digging into PubMed and pulling things out about, various nutraceuticals and diet and lifestyle and exercise. Was he the kind of force that took your journey in that direction, or was it kind of both of you together that said, hey, we have to find an alternative solution to than just medication?
Well, it's interesting. It's very interesting. When I look back, it is, when I look at all the serendipity and the things that had to happen for the journey to go in the direction it did, it is incredible. And one thing that I've shared on very few interviews is that a month prior to my first exacerbation, I had a very deep sense to change my diet. Okay, this is true, and I didn't do it, but that happened. And then I believe it was my mom who, in the car ride somewhere in there, said, this has to have something to do with diet. I mean, she was a nurse, so she instinctively had controlled our diets previously when we were young, so we had a lot of food allergies. And then my dad PubMed wasn't around at the time, so he had to go to the medical library, right? And that's where it started. So he kind of went after it. And then another serendipitous thing happened where someone from my high school shared a book that was about diet. I think it was Dr. Swank's research, was in the 40s and 50s, I believe. Yeah. And that really set the course. And then within 6 weeks, not even, I was, on a very specific diet regime.
And has that diet changed since you first started, or have you modified it and tweaked it? I mean, I know you're mostly on a paleo style diet. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, it has changed. There's no doubt. As I've gotten older, it's gotten harder. I thought it would go the other way, but it didn't. It's gotten more restrictive for me, which just has its own challenges. But it is, dairy-free, gluten-free, moderation in eggs, no legumes, low fat, low sugar, and then, high in vegetables, protein, things like that. And then again, what I try to share with people, and I'm not alone in this, is that, there's going to be specific foods to an individual that could cause them problems. So we talk about people getting allergy tests and things like that. And then, what I really try to share with people is really studying your body like a lab, being very present in how you feel every day. So when you wake up, you feel, I feel fatigued or whatever the case. Like, well, what did I eat yesterday? What was the roadmap? What did I, is there something that snuck its way into my diet? Right. Which is getting more challenging these days. I don't know why, but people are, companies are adding additives and things like this to gluten-free, dairy-free products. And you study the additive, you're like, why is this even in there? Right. Yeah. And then you're on your butt for a day because it wipes you out. But, so I agree. It's become more restrictive, actually.
I mean, I think it's good that you're, helping people raise awareness around their diet and how it affects their body as well as their brain, right? Because those two things are intimately connected. They're interconnected, right? Especially with MS. And then you're saying, hey, maybe gluten-free doesn't work for you, but just give it a try and see if you notice a difference, basically, because your body's your own chemistry lab, right?
Well, I mean, we try to, if you go to directms.org -ms, there's the science is all there in regards to, okay, why are these foods, why are we eliminating them? And so what we do for MS in particular, it's a science-based approach with gluten and dairy being taken out. Here's why. It could affect your multiple sclerosis. So, it's a challenge because the MS, the diet, the best bet diet is a little bit of a buckshot. So it's like, take this out, take this out, take this out. Once you've got rid of those pro-inflammatory foods, the journey can continue.
Yeah. And so you mentioned in the beginning, you were taking some medications for your symptoms. You discovered diet, started to experiment with that. You're now on a, what I think most people would say a strict paleo diet.
Similar, yeah.
Are you medication free at this point? I think people would want to know that. And have you been medication free since the dietary changes?
Yeah, I've been medication or MS medication. I want to be clear, MS medication free for over 25 years.
Yeah.
Because, one thing that I do struggle with, is that especially I think in the US in particular, it can be even more dramatic. There is a major anti-pharma, ideology that goes on. And I'm not that extreme on that side. Like, if there was a drug that was highly effective with no side effects and, cost effective, I would take it. I mean, I take antibiotics when I need to. I take Advil very rarely, but when I have to, like, I'm not too extreme that way. But no, with the MS drugs, I haven't touched any of them, and I don't intend to. I've yet to see one that really interests me.
Yeah. So using obviously pharmaceuticals appropriately, they can be part of someone's plan. But there was I don't know if he's a physician or a researcher in Living Proof that he had pretty good, he made a point to say that the MS drugs that are currently on the market really have no long-term studies to them, which I think is such an important point, because there are lots of medications that seem to work in the short term. Some of them are based on the placebo effect. I think just kind of raising awareness around that point is important for people to recognize, because then they start to see, okay, medication's not necessarily, it's not good or bad. It could be a part of my program, and realize that I should be aware, if I'm taking this on a long-term basis, that there aren't necessarily good studies to show their efficacy or potential harm. And a lot of medications, we don't have long-term studies regarding harm of the medication.
And then that's really what the point we were trying to make with a lot of the film, is saying, okay, if you are on what's the comparable for the person who's on the drug and not on the drug over 30 years? That was where Dr. Ebers really weighed in and showed there was really no long-term effect, which was, personally for me, it was actually really encouraging to hear that, just from an old personal perspective. Like, here's arguably the top MS researcher in the world, and he's saying, if you don't take it, it's okay too. Right. So okay, well, why would I do this?
Yeah, no, it's true. I thought the same thing when I was listening to him. I was like, all right, so if we can kind of reframe what he's saying, it's like, this drug may have a place short term, maybe for a couple of weeks or a couple months, and then you probably need to wean off or come off that drug and lean into the other lifestyle factors that you talk about in Living Proof and on your website. Just so everyone knows, the website is mshope.com, and everyone can check that out. And when did that website come into play? Because it's a great resource if anyone's interested in learning more about Mathew's approach and all the different lifestyle approaches on the website.
Yeah, that we created that in 2000. I think it was 2015 or 2014. I can't recall. That's when we launched it. It was the genesis of it was just to be able to reach people. I'm a filmmaker. That's my job. So I kind of knew how to communicate with people and try to reach the masses. And that was the goal. Because my parents had direct-ms.org, and that was good. But my perspective was it was a little complicated and it was very in-depth, which is not a bad thing. But for the average person, sometimes that can be a challenge for me too. So I'm not saying that I don't find that challenging either. So I wanted to make one that was really user-friendly. So people who were just newly diagnosed could go. And one thing, I know it's called MS Hope, but I would like people, when they log in, they see me and they go, okay, this guy is after 25 years. And then the hope goes away and then you put it into action. So, right. Cause I think for me, that's it. If you don't get to work and get after it, you can hope all you want, but it's not going to have much effect for you.
That's right. It's true. I mean, really what you're saying is life is a participatory sport. So you can learn about things and read them and they seem interesting. And then there's that point when you kind of cross that threshold and you say, okay, I'm going to take what I've learned now and I'm going to put that into action to see how much I can change in my life.
Exactly. And I wanted to, one of the other, from a creative point of view, I wanted to make it so if I was diagnosed at 19, what would I want to see?
Mm-hmm.
That was how I thought. Because when I was diagnosed, there was almost nothing. There was like one book from Judy Graham that was super inspiring. Like that was it. And I didn't know anybody or a man in particular outside of Richard Pryor. So, back then I had to like formulate what I wanted to be. And I did a lot of stuff like the vision stuff like that is becoming very popular now. Way back then, like I was already doing that, creating that person, that self.
What I appreciate about your website is that it's very clear and easy to understand. A lot of websites that you go to around health information, they're very complicated, use complicated words. They're too long. They don't have a good direction or kind of actionable steps to take. And when I go to your website, I'm like, okay, here's diet, here's exercise, download some things, and very simple, like here's what's recommended based on the science. And there are things that people can implement into their life, and they don't cost much, right?
No, I mean, the diet is expensive, I think, compared to the average diet, and the supplements can be pricey, but we're not talking about $50,000 a year drugs. Like
right. That's right.
It's a different game. And I try to tell people it's a very hard message to communicate where once you start taking care of yourself, like once you start looking after you, then like the universe is going to shift around you. And all of a sudden these financial concerns will shift too. I know that sounds out there, but I've lived it and I've seen it. So, but you got to take that step into you being your health being the number one priority for you to all of a sudden better your world.
Do you find that, because I know you talk to a lot of people with MS and you have gone around Canada talking to people at conferences, do you find that it just takes time for people's perspective to shift from one where I have a diagnosis, I'm sick and I have to take medication, to one where, okay, I have this condition, there are things I can do to overcome it or to significantly alleviate it. And then that perspective shifts of someone being diagnosed with a disease or a condition to going back to where they were?
That's a great question. And that is, if I could figure out how to get that light switch for people, I try to study it. Like I try to figure out what it takes for someone to to jog their mind out of
there's a belief system there that is ingrained, especially in American culture. Like you said earlier, if there's something wrong with you, you take a drug. That's ingrained in us from an early age.
Yeah, and I also think too that there's an idea that like once you're diagnosed with something, you're on a downhill descent, and you can't free yourself from it, and that's a cage in itself. And so people, one question, because one of the big terms in MS is progressive MS, right? Which means it's progressive. So people ask me what kind of MS I have, and I tell them I have progressive MS, but I'm progressively getting better. And so I flip it because it could be a weaponized term, right? It's like, oh, you're progressively getting worse. You better take a drug. Like, wow, like, is that true? And, and this is where with Living Proof, my story and Dr. Walls, and, we have a sequel coming. We're going to show that it doesn't have to be the case. I'm 45 years old now. I mean, I'm doing a marathon next month. Like I don't know. I mean, I'm not boasting, but I'm in incredible health. So like, is that the outcome? Like why aren't I on the front of the MS Society?
Yeah.
Like I don't understand. Like it's not that I'm saying I want to be, but it's like, it does seem ridiculous.
I like the reframe. So I'm progressing to be better.
Yeah. Every day.
Yeah.
Like every single day. And that's my other part of the message, where it's like your journey to optimal health starts like right now. So you can like turn this off and go work out, do something good. Like there's so many things you can, every opportunity is a choice to better yourself.
You mentioned some of the MS societies, and there's an MS society in every country now. Has the Canadian MS Society, if we can chat just for a minute about that, you talk about them in the film a little bit. Have they tried to reach out to you, collaborate with you?
No,
nothing.
No, they had not. They had an opportunity to speak on a panel with me in Toronto, and they declined. Um, and they said they gave a speech or like a little line. They said there were some factual problems with my movie, and I said okay. And I addressed the crowd, and I said, it is. I said there are some factual problems because I think I said that in the movie, I think it's about 15% of their money goes to research. Well, the truth is it's 13%. Mm. So they're right. I inflated the amount that they give to research.
I mean, I think it's a shame that they don't collaborate with people like yourself that are raising awareness. And I mean, ultimately, you're educating people about what the options are.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to take time. And I think, obviously back then there was a lot of anger. I was a younger man and, I was really trying to get out there. But now it's more like, okay, how can we shift this? And are they even like relevant? Like, I know that sounds in the online space. Like sometimes I compare the likes. I'm like, okay, if I post this compared to like what they post, like, okay, what's actually happening? Like, yeah, they can buy the billboard, but are they actually getting the traction? I don't know.
Right. So it sounds like your messaging has started to change since that initial movie, Living Proof.
That's a good question. I mean, in regards to like diet, exercise, vitamin D, prayer, meditation, not really. I mean, those are similar kind of, I'm definitely going that way. But if there is a message shift, it's certainly about really putting people to accountable for their own health. Mm. I'm definitely stepping back from systems, expecting the MS Society to help or like whatever to help. It's just, okay, look, it's on you. That's a very hard lesson to learn for most people, me included. Like I had to learn it the hard way. Like help is not on the way. Mm-hmm. It is in little bits, but then, once you built your lifeboat, you gotta row it.
Yeah. I know you talk a lot about personal accountability on your social media a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I do. And it's, you know what, can I tell you, do you have time for one story, an interesting story about this?
Yeah, shoot.
Yeah. So normally I train outside. Okay. And it's brutal. Because I live in Canada. I have this hill that's like, it can be horrible. Like it's hilly. It's really tough. Okay. So then we've got all these wildfires in our, so we can't run outside. Right? You really can't go outside right now. Okay. So for a couple of days I went to the gym and, for days in a row, I went to the gym and I worked out. I'm like, hey, this is actually really nice and it's comfortable and there's a shower and all like that. By day 3, even though the skies had cleared, my mind had already convinced me to go back to the gym and not do the hard work. And I had to go, okay, no, Mathew, you've got to get out there and go do the hard work. And that for me, it was a lesson. I'm like, okay, even in my own discipline, my body was pushing me towards comfort within 2 days.
Right.
So, and that's, my life. So I'm like, okay, you have to be, it's a daily exercise. And I mean, is that your message as well?
It fits in well with the message of chronic pain because, what you're describing really in lots of different ways is what someone with pain lives like on a daily basis. It's so easy to get lost in, I hurt, I'm going to sit down. I'm not going to exercise today. I'm not going to go to work today. I'm going to soothe myself with food or alcohol. Yeah. Or, fill in whatever addiction that all of us as humans are susceptible to, because our brain is just naturally evolved to seek safety and stay away from danger, basically. And, safety and danger doesn't necessarily have to be like the saber-toothed tiger. It could just be, I'm tired today and I don't feel like running outside, like you mentioned.
Yeah.
But it's really interesting.
Like,
it's just a little bit of your, I sense a little bit of mindfulness in there. Like, you recognize that you're getting kind of caught up in that pattern of comfort. And you're like, all right, I need to push myself a little bit today and see how that goes.
Yeah. I mean, I taught myself a lesson. I'm like, no, you're going outside. And then when I got myself outside, I'm like, no, you're going further than you would normally go. And I just, and people, I don't want to come across like I'm punishing myself, but I'm just bettering, I'm sharpening the blade. And that's not an easy process. I truly believe you don't have growth without struggle and conflict. People don't like that. That's not the message people want to hear. Yeah. Some of us do. But I also believe that there's like, I'm fairly spiritual as well. And I think that's the next film is really going to go into that. And I do think our material beings are reflections of what's going on the inside. And so once we enter disease state, yes, there's external variables we've got to deal with, but there's also, incredible internal variables that we've got to go after, which is very hard. So I am not going to pretend that I have mastered this or I have any great advice, because it's very, very, it's way harder than I think than other stuff.
Yeah. So on that note, you have a good support system around you, family and friends, and you have a spiritual foundation that supports you in all of this. Yeah.
Yeah. And practice. For me, it all comes down to practice. Like you wake up in the morning and, I think that spiritual discipline is incredibly difficult. Yeah. It's no different. I do sometimes, when I get on my soapbox, I don't think spirituality, discipline is about, comfort. I just don't. I think that you can feel that. And if happiness is a byproduct of that and feelings of euphoria come from the discipline, then that's great. But that's, my journey.
Well, because doing the work can be difficult sometimes, whether it's spiritual work or whether it's actually physical work.
Yeah. And I think that for me, I've just chosen to just go into that, and if I didn't have the good outcomes, then fine. Like, if I was really ill and things weren't good and, and then I'm crazy, but things are pretty good, man.
So you mentioned a second film. Can you tell us about some of the plans around the next movie?
Yeah, there's two parts. One, we shot a ton on the first movie that didn't make it to the screen. So we have some great characters and some great moments and things that need to be, I think, shown to the world. And then also too, there's been new developments, and other treatments that we want to explore. Things that I've done that we haven't gone public with that I think could be really important. And then I can't give it away, but we're also involved in another major project right now, in my opinion, that could yield some incredible results for people in the next, say, decade. I can't say it. I don't want to say it right now, but it's very, very hopeful. I don't know if we're even going to put it in the movie, but some things have come to the surface that are, again, it's like, it's like the Star Wars trilogy. There's lots of different obstacles that come with new things, right? But you got to keep moving.
And the next movie is focused on MS as well.
Yeah. But I hope that when you saw the first one, the way I designed it, I guess we designed it, I designed it, we designed it in a way that it was not just about MS. My MS was the flashpoint. And even if you see how we wrote the Amazon Prime is like on autoimmune disease, like we didn't I really tried to create the movie that this is for all illness.
Yeah.
MS is just the catalyst.
Definitely that's the message. When I saw it, I was like, this is a really good movie, not just about MS, but for almost every chronic disease that people struggle with now, whether it's physical or mental, and they, at this point, all overlap in my mind. So it's a good, I think it's a really good model for lots of different conditions.
Yeah. And that was the intent. And that's why I chose scenes around the family. And I chose scenes to show, okay, that you're diagnosed with Alzheimer's. You're going to struggle with this stuff. Here's some of the human variables you're going to encounter. Right. And then how we designed it that way. And then we really try to show hope. One thing I really don't like is movies, there's a lot of sadness in Living Proof, no question. But if you don't show like hope at the end, or like, okay, here's the how-to, I get very frustrated. I'm like, well, why did I go through this? Like, there's got to be some light at the end of the tunnel. In my opinion, so when I make movies, I ask the team, I'm like, well, if we're not offering a solution here, then why are we doing this? Mm-hmm. And I did one on opioid crisis. So, I kind of know a little bit about the pain world. And even in that film, we tried to show some hope.
Yeah. No, that's like your movie. When I watched it, like, great message. And then it syncs really nice with the mshope.com website. so people can watch the movie, they can kind of get motivated in essence, and then jump over to the website and download whatever they need to get started, which I think was really cool. It was done really nice, really well.
Yeah, thank you. And that also was the intent. So I would tell people in the edit suites, I'm like, look, we've got, after they turn the movie off, they're going to go to their phones and go to the website. That has to be, not that it's a big infomercial, but in a way it is. Like it's, it's like that was the point.
Yeah. I mean, I think people are looking for strong call to actions like that. Instead of some of the call to actions and the advice they hear from the allopathic world is, well, you're just going to have to learn how to, deal with this for the rest of your life, basically. And that's a completely different message than what your entire platform is really sending.
Yeah. And I think that, where I'm at with my life too, I'm kind of happy to hear you. I am happy to hear you say that, because I agree with you. I totally agree. Like that is the problem, where it's just like, well, you're sick. Here's a remedy to treat the symptoms and good luck. We'll see how this goes. Like, I don't think that that's very helpful. Yeah. And I think, my perspective is, I was literally having this conversation with my wife last night where it's like, where are my upper limits? Like, that's how I see my life. I'm like, I'm 45, I'm doing this. And I never thought I'd be in this great a shape. Like, I didn't. I thought by 45 would be over, And I'm like, no, like I'm in better shape than I was in my 20s. So what does it mean? Maybe my peak is 90, maybe it's 200. Like, why am I going to, why am I going to put a ceiling on what's possible? And that's another thing I do too. And I don't know if you do this, but like I find mentors, I find people who are like ahead of me, and I try to study them. And I'm like, how'd you get there? Right. Or if I see someone like at an airport and I watch them, like if the guy is like, and men in particular, because, and I do that with women as well. Like I try to really look at successful people. So there's no gender, bias on that. But I try to like really look and go, okay, well, how did this person do it?
It's like when you learn how to ski, you always want to ski with someone who's just a little bit better than you are. And you kind of follow them down the slope, and eventually your skills increase. Your balance, balance gets better, your endurance gets better.
Yeah. And I think if I had a note of advice for people, is that person will appear in your life. And it's this incredible thing that happens to me, where it's like when I hit this point in my journey, whether it be career wise or athletic wise, some other person appears that's better than me. And I'm like, where have you been? Like I'm like, I should know about you. Right. But I don't. And then I study that person, and then I try to get to after that person. And then when I hit what they do, then suddenly a new person comes in. And I think it's that awareness, right? That the universe is constantly going to give you that next piece.
And you also strike me as someone who's very open to that. Like, what is the next piece? What is the next step? Where is my next lesson to learn? I think there's a big factor of that becomes part of, I notice it in your story, and I've also noticed it in other people who have, overcome things like trauma and chronic pain, things that can be quite devastating for people, but they've kind of flipped the script on it, basically.
Yeah, and I think that's about being awake, and I think that's a term right now that's, I think, a bit overused. I think, my own opinion, because I don't know if people really know what they're talking about sometimes when they say that. And I think that being awake is like really being present of like what's in front of you, like what is happening in front of you. Like, like I'm looking at you, like, I don't know, like, you have a message for me. What is that? I got to be thinking about chronic pain. Okay. Why is chronic pain come into my life? Am I dealing with that? Am I going to deal with that? Like, is that a piece I need to work on? It's that processing that I think that for me is where life gets so exciting, because I'm like, well, the universe is going to constantly be giving me things. I just got to wake up. Like if you saw my journal, like I have a journal, like sometimes like before I go to bed, I'll literally write in capital letters, stay awake, exclamation, 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 right? To remind myself the next day to wake up and be like, no, like be alert. Like don't follow your own imaginations. At times follow what the universe is putting in front of you.
Awesome. Well, we're going to stay curious with you because everyone who listens to this podcast is curious about how to solve complex health-related problems. In the interim, Mathew, please let everyone know how they can follow you and stay connected to your work and learn more about you.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I try my best to put things on social media and Instagram, and I'm not the greatest at it. I'm getting better, I think. But you can, mshope.com is kind of like the hub. So through that, you can find the Facebook, you can find the documentary, you can get a free cookbook, you can find, all the social media stuff, like all the links for the information you need to know come through mshope.com. And then if you're following, I try to keep it consistent on the various platforms. Again, not the greatest. I don't have a team. We don't have a team, right? I mean, someone else wrote me, I'm doing another podcast. And like, can we get a hold of your PR people? I'm like, you're talking to them. So like, it's me. And like, I put my personal phone number on the website. So like people, I'm really accessible that way. That's actually a fun thing for me because people call and like looking for MS. So like, oh, hey, they just are shocked, right?
And then they don't know what to say, right?
They don't. They're just like, oh, yeah. I didn't think. I'm like, well, this is the real deal. Like,
right.
There's no layers here.
Right.
It's a real person. Like this is real. Like,
Yeah. I get that too with emails. People email me, same thing. Like, do you really treat pain? I'm like, yeah, I do actually. And
you say, yeah,
I've been doing this for like, 3 decades and everything here is real. It's not, there's no smoke and mirrors basically.
Right.
Yeah.
That's good, man. Keep it up.
Yeah. All right. So everyone, again, check out his website, mshope.com, and the movie on Amazon Prime is Living Proof. At the end of every podcast, I ask you to share this with your friends, family, and colleagues on social media. Drop it in a Facebook group or other place where people are talking about MS, chronic pain, and how to overcome chronic disease. I'm Dr. Joe Tatta. We'll see you soon.
Thank you for listening to the Healing Pain Podcast with Dr. Joe Tatta. To subscribe to the podcast and learn more, visit Integrative Pain Science Institute.com. That's Integrative Pain Science Institute.com. Sign up to receive weekly updates, leave a review on iTunes, and share this episode with your friends.